The banquet hall smelled like warm bread and someone's too heavy perfume. I arrived at Hargrove Banquet Hall in Delworth at 7:14 p.m. on a Saturday, 8 minutes before the Alderman family was scheduled to walk through the front door, which my mother had texted me about 3 separate times that week as though punctuality were a character trait she had personally installed in me. I found my seat, not next to Renee, not near my parents, but at the far bend of the rectangular table, between a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 4 years and an empty chair that turned out to belong to Renee's future mother-in-law. I straightened the laminated menu card in front of me. My thumb pressed against its edge and I felt the slight give of the laminate separating at one corner. I pressed it again. I was not nervous exactly. I knew what the evening was going to feel like, the way you know what a cold room feels like before you step inside, not because you're psychic but because you've been in that room before. When my mother walked in with Renee and the aldermans, she was already talking. She had the voice she used for people she wanted to impress. Half a register higher, each sentence landing like a small gift. She guided everyone to their seats with her hands outstretched, and when her eyes found me across the table, they did the thing they always did. A half-second pause, a recalibration, and then she smiled in my direction the way people smile at furniture that is positioned adequately. "And this," she said, gesturing toward me with the open palm of someone introducing a side dish, "is our other daughter, Nadia. She cleans houses for a living." My father didn't look up from his menu. "We've given up on her, honestly," he said. "Different path." He said it the way you'd say different weather. Not mean exactly, just accurate, descriptive, factual in the way only a person with no awareness of damage can be factual. The woman to my left, silver hair, a silk blouse the color of slate, a posture that came from decades of being someone people paid attention to, went completely still. She had been mid-reach for her water glass. Her hand stopped. She looked at me. And then she didn't say anything. The table settled. Introductions moved on. My cousin said something about the bread. But the woman beside me had not moved, and I could feel her looking at the side of my face the way you feel the sun through a window. Not aggressive, just present and warming something I hadn't realized was cold. My name was Nadia Ferris. I was 31 years old, and I ran the residential services division at Callaway and Fitch Property Services in Columbus, which was not a cleaning company, though I understood why people made that mistake if the only information they had been given was that I once spent 2 summers doing exactly that to put myself through a property management certification program while my sister finished a degree my parents paid for in full. What I actually did, I managed a portfolio of residential properties across central Ohio. I oversaw maintenance contracts, tenant relations, seasonal inspections, and a small crew of 5. It had taken me 4 years to build that crew from one part-time contractor to a functioning team, and I had not done it by asking for anything I hadn't already earned twice over. The quarterly contract value I carried into last year was $6,847 per account at our mid-tier level, and I had closed 11 of those myself. I drove a 4-year-old Civic and I kept my first countersigned service agreement in a gold-tabbed binder in the passenger seat, not for sentiment exactly, but because the weight of it felt like something I had earned with my hands and I hadn't found a better place for it yet. My sister Renee was 27. She was the kind of beautiful that other people narrate. Strangers said things about her face the way they comment on weather or architecture. She had been with Marcus Alderman for 2 years, and when he proposed, my mother called me to announce it the way news anchors announce things, with a cadence that assumed I was one of many listeners and not a specific person with a relationship to the information. I said congratulations. There was a pause, the kind that meant she had expected more, and then she moved on to the logistics of the dinner. The engagement dinner invitation came in a group text. Hargrove, Saturday the 15th, 7 p.m. Be there. No punctuation after the period. That was the whole message. I drove down from Columbus that afternoon in 4 hours of flat interstate and thought about whether I was going. I got off at my exit. I kept driving. I told myself I was going because Renee was my sister and because I had not yet learned to stop hoping that the occasion would be different from the preparation for the occasion. I did not tell myself I was going because I missed them. I had learned, slowly, to stop mistaking habit for love. What I had done for that house on Crestline Drive over the previous 6 years was the kind of thing that doesn't look like anything until you try to subtract it. When my father's hours were cut and the mortgage on 14 Crestline Drive tipped into its fourth late payment, I transferred money from an account I had been building since I was 22. I did not do this once. I did not make a ceremony of it. I moved money, and then I moved more money, and the house stayed in their names, and the subject was never formally discussed. My mother mentioned once, offhandedly, that things were a little easier this month. That was as close to an acknowledgement as it got. When my mother's car needed a transmission repair that the service estimate put at just under $4,000, I paid it. When Renee needed textbooks, fees, a laptop that she told our parents was essential for the program, I was the one who received the quiet phone call and the slightly longer pause afterward that meant the ask was coming. I paid for those things too. Not all at once. Over time, in the way that you pay for things when you have decided that stability for the people around you is worth more than accounting. There was a period of about 3 years where I was covering 2 households, mine and theirs, on a salary that didn't have room for it, and I did it by not buying things I wanted and not going places I would have liked to go and not saying anything to anyone about any of it. I also drove down on weekends, sometimes, to fix things. Not because I was asked directly, but because my mother would mention in conversation that the back porch railing was a little loose, or that the kitchen faucet had a sound. I would arrive on a Saturday with a hardware store bag and spend 3 hours doing what needed doing, and I would leave, and the next time the railing or the faucet came up in conversation, it was as though I had not been there. The repairs held. My name did not. That was the nature of the contribution. It was absorbed. It left no residue in the version of events my family kept. The first time I heard myself described as the one who cleans houses to someone outside the family, I was 26. My mother was on the phone with a friend. I was in the kitchen refilling my water glass, and she said it the way she said all things about me. Not with contempt, exactly, but with the particular flatness of someone who has already decided what a thing is worth and sees no reason to revisit the assessment. I set my glass down carefully. I walked back to the living room. I did not say anything. I sat with that moment for about 3 days, and then I let it settle into the place where I kept the other moments like it. Not forgotten, not catalogued, just present, the way old weather is present in your joints. The description had not been offered as cruelty. That was the part that required the most sitting with. It had been offered as a simple fact. The cruelty was in how little she had thought about it. The Aldermans were 4 people. Marcus, his parents, Gerald and Diane, and a younger brother, Theo, who spent most of dinner looking at his phone with the focused energy of someone disarming a bomb. Gerald Alderman was a structural engineer. He talked about load-bearing walls the way my father talked about sports, knowledgeably, comfortably, with the ease of a person who has never been asked to justify his expertise to anyone. Diane was quieter. She had the particular quality of someone accustomed to listening in rooms where she was the most informed person present. She asked questions that were short and specific, the kind of questions that mean someone has already done the reading and wants to know if you have too. My mother was in full performance. She described Renee's virtues in the plural and the superlative, moving from intelligence to beauty to warmth with the efficiency of a prepared speech. My father nodded at intervals. Renee smiled the smile she used when she was grateful and slightly embarrassed at once. Marcus refilled his mother's water glass without being asked and said something quiet to Renee that made her laugh once, quickly, with her hand over her mouth. I watched that and thought it was a good sign. When the table had settled into its first comfortable lull, the bread was being passed, the wine had arrived, my mother looked toward my end of the table. "You haven't properly met Nadia," she said to Diane, as though I had arrived late and not been sitting there for 20 minutes. "I don't think we have," Diane said, and turned to me with the open attention of someone who is actually going to listen. "She cleans houses," my mother said. "For a living. That's her thing." She reached for her wine. "We keep hoping she'll find something more stable, but—" She let the sentence end there, parenthetical, complete. Something went still in my sternum, not anger, not humiliation, a kind of weight settling like water finding level. "It's honest work," my father said, in the tone of someone being generous. "Very honest," my mother agreed. She smiled at Diane. We worry, you know. Every parent does. You want more for your children." "We've tried to encourage her," my father said. He set his fork down. Different directions. School, certifications, different things. She's always had her own ideas. He said her own ideas the way you'd describe a recurring plumbing problem. I reached for my water glass. You'd think by 30 you'd have a little more direction, my mother said. But what can you do? We've given up, honestly. You just, at some point you accept it. I set the glass down without sound. Diane had not touched her wine. She was still looking at me, and the expression on her face was not pity. It was something that hadn't resolved yet, something working toward a recognition it hadn't completed. Ungrateful too, sometimes, my mother added, quietly, almost as a footnote. You give, and… She shrugged. That's children. The table went quiet. Theo looked up briefly from his phone. Marcus reached for Renee's hand. I set my water glass down without sound. I excused myself a few minutes after the bread was cleared. I walked through the banquet hall's side corridor to the lobby. I stood near the front entrance. I looked at the parking lot through the glass doors. I went to the restroom. I ran cold water over my wrists. I dried my hands with a paper towel. I walked back to the corridor. I stopped at the coat rack outside the private dining room. I retrieved my bag from under my chair. I took out my phone and checked it. I set the phone face down on the table. I reached into the bag again and closed my hand around the spine of the binder. I set the binder on the table beside my plate. I sat back down. Diane Alderman was looking at the binder. It was standard enough, dark blue, professional, the kind of thing you see in any business context, but the gold embossed tab along the side read Callaway and Fitch Property Services, and the tab below it read Residential Portfolio, Central Ohio Division. She said, very quietly, "Is that Callaway and Fitch?" "Yes," I said. "Gerald," she said. She touched her husband's arm once, lightly. "Gerald." He turned. He saw the binder. His expression did the thing that expressions do when the brain has arrived somewhere before the face has caught up. "You work for Callaway and Fitch," he said. It was not entirely a question. "I run their residential division," I said. The table had gone quiet in the way that tables go quiet when something is happening that no one fully understands yet, but everyone can feel. My mother was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen her use before, something between attention and caution, like a person recalculating a route. I reached into the bag. I took out my phone. I opened the Callaway and Fitch client portal, a screen Gerald Alderman clearly recognized because he leaned forward almost imperceptibly, the way engineers lean toward load calculations, and turned it so the table could see the portfolio summary. 11 active accounts. Aggregate managed property value, $724,500. My name in the account manager field on every single line. I laid the open phone flat on the table beside the binder. Callaway and Fitch manages the property maintenance contract for the Alderman development on Fenwick, Diane said. She said it to the table, not to me, the way people state facts that have restructured the room. Gerald's been working with them for 2 years. 3, Gerald said. Since the Fenwick build started. He looked at me with an expression I did not try to read. I've spoken with the residential division. Several times. Then you've spoken with me, I said. He said, yes. I think I have. There was a pause. Renee's hand had stilled beneath Marcus's. My father's fork was down. The whole table held the particular quality of a room where the air has changed and no one is yet sure what to do about it. My mother had not said anything. I looked at her once. The color had moved out of her face in the incremental way that color moves. Not all at once, but retreating, section by section, like a tide going the wrong direction. You said I was ungrateful, I said. I've been moving money into this family for 6 years. You said I had no direction. I've been running a portfolio that includes your son-in-law's father's billed accounts for the past 2 years without mentioning it once. I said it without raising my voice. I said it the way you read a list. What you told this table about me tonight was a version of me you decided on a long time ago. That's the only version you've kept. I picked up the phone. I closed the portal. Gerald's going to keep working with Callaway and Fitch, I said. That doesn't change. I'm good at what I do. That doesn't change either. I picked up the binder. I set it in the bag. What changes, I said, is what I spend on things that aren't returned. I did not look at my mother again. I looked at Diane, who was still watching me with that expression, resolved now, recognizable, and I nodded once and she nodded back, and that was the whole of it. 6 months later, I sat in the parking lot of a property on the east side of Columbus with the binder open on my passenger seat, reviewing a new account intake form while the late afternoon came through the windshield in long flat angles. I had just signed my 14th account. I had not been back to Delworth. My mother sent a text in the 3rd week of October, about 6 weeks after the dinner. It said we should talk. Dad and I have been thinking. She sent a second one 4 days later, Nadia. Please. A third one 2 weeks after that, which was only my name and a question mark. I read each one. I did not reply to any of them. Renee called once, in November. I let it go to voicemail. She said she understood if I needed space and that the wedding was in the spring and that she hoped I would come. She said she was sorry, and then she said for what it's worth, Diane thinks very highly of you, and then she said she loved me. I listened to it twice. I did not call back. The life I had been building in Columbus, the accounts, the crew of 5, the early mornings reading intake forms in parking lots, continued. It did not need the dinner at Hargrove to mean anything different than what it was. It did not need to be a turning point. It was just the night I stopped performing a version of myself that no one in that room had ever actually looked at. There had been a version of me at that table for years, summarized, reduced, repeated across phone calls and dinner parties and introductions to strangers, and that version had never once asked to be corrected. That was the thing I was done with. Not them, not yet. The performance. What I kept from the whole of it was this. The things you build with your hands and your time have a weight that testimony can't touch. Someone can stand at a table and describe you and be entirely wrong, and the work doesn't care. The work just is. It sits in the passenger seat on a Tuesday afternoon with gold tabs and a countersign page, and it is there when you need to remember what you actually are. I closed the binder. The late light was still coming through the glass. I had one more account to review before dark. If this story sat with you, the quiet kind that doesn't shout but stays, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the best thing you can do is put the right story in front of the right person. The binder sat on the passenger seat beside me, its gold tab catching what was left of the afternoon.